Welcome to day 2 of Congressman Hank Johnson's 4th Series Grants Workshop for this week. Today is Terrific Tuesday, and we have a great workshop for you for today. Today's session will be tips for submitting a successful application. We are pretty much confident that you're going to get something out of today's workshop. So please sit back and enjoy. And also, just to remind you that this is being recorded and it will be on our website. So if you need to step out for any reason, rest assured that you will have this presentation because it will be on our website and available to the public. So ladies and gentlemen, let's get started. Without no further ado, I would like to introduce our Congressman, Hank Johnson. Congressman Johnson.
Thank you, Eric Hubbard, and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to day 2 of my annual Grants Workshop series. I'm Congressman Hank Johnson, and I'm honored to be here with you today in celebration of our Week of Hope, also known as Helping Other People Elevate. Got it? Hope. Helping other people elevate. Serving others is one of the most fulfilling experiences that you can have, and it's not based on ambition, financial gain, or conceit, but humility and selflessness. True service is not looking for others to serve you. It is not there for accolades, but instead it's requiring a humbling of yourself to look for nothing in return. An act of service is ultimately the best gift that we can provide to humanity. And when we provide service to humanity, we're also serving ourselves. It encompasses love and compassion, understanding and empathy, forgiveness and grace. Organizations like yours, Mr. Sperling, are the pillar of this district and the beacon to those who have lost their way. I hope that today's workshop will provide you with essential tips needed to submit a successful grant application and ultimately to be awarded federal grant funding so that your organization can maximize its fullest potential to serve. I'd also like to thank Mr. Charles Sperling, Executive Director and founder of STAND Incorporated, for being here. STAND Incorporated has received millions of dollars in federal grants, and I appreciate his willingness to speak with you today and provide you with tips so that you too can successfully apply and receive grants. I'd also like to thank Mr. Kyle Bryant, Senior Environmental Specialist for the Environmental Protection Agency, in providing tips to applying from a federal agency standpoint. And I believe that both perspectives are equally important. Mr. Sperling, I'll kick it to you to take it from here.
Thank you, Congressman Johnson. I want to say before I start to share my screen and my slides that I'm eternally grateful for an opportunity to present some of the work as a result of some of the work that we've done. We live in a community these days where there's a lot of need and few resources. So you are a congressman that's got feet on the ground and your fingers are on the pulse of what this community really needs. Your continued dedication, providing meaningful information and opportunities, not just information, but opportunities for the people of your district. I also want to take a moment just to lift up the fact that Congressman Johnson has an awesome staff. They continue to put the work in as well. And namely, I'm talking about Eric Hubbard and Kathy Register, Chief of Staff Marcus Garvey, and of course, Candace Williams. Before I put the slides up, I'm going to say that what I'm going to talk to you today about is from my own experiences. We've been doing this work for quite some time, and as you'll see as I progress through the slides, you'll have about 30 minutes with me. So let me try and get these slides up for us now. Can you see my screen?
Yeah, we can.
Okay, very good, very good. So let me start this presentation from the beginning. All right. So as I mentioned before, Congressman Johnson mentioned before, my name is Charles Sperling. I'm the founder and director of Stand Inc. And we've been in DeKalb County for the past 20 plus years, almost 25 years now, providing behavioral health services. So what's behavioral health services? Our cornerstone, our foundation is about substance use treatment and mental health, co-occurring disorders, HIV/AIDS, domestic violence. These are the kinds of things over the past more than 2 decades that we've been involved in. And I'll say that we could not have been as successful as we've been without federal grants. And we could not have been as successful as we've been without the support of Congressman Hank Johnson's office. I'm not just saying this because we're on in his annual information sessions, but it's true. Even behind the scenes, when I'm able to pick up the phone and call Eric or talk to Kathy about different kinds of aspects, different aspects of the federal grant process. So I want to thank them both again, just sincerely, for being available for us. So we are a nonprofit, meaning that we're a 501c3. We're a tax-exempt organization, and we have worked out of that status for since our inception. What we're going to talk about today, again, at the risk of being repetitious, is this will be practice-based information, things that I've gathered and gained over the last couple of decades doing the work, and it's an experiential perspective. Is what you'll be getting from me. Some of the stuff is going to be not so much experiential, but some of it will be just based on what SAMHSA is going to require from us. Some of the stuff said already is that we're registered with the IRS as a 501c3 nonprofit. And we did that in 1999. We got started with this. And let me just say this, and I live this concept out loud. I'm a man in long-term recovery. So what does that mean? That means that sometime in my life, I had my own battle and bout with drugs and alcohol. But I found out that there are people who care. And because they cared, they reached down in the hole that I was in, and they helped me to get out of that hole. And as a result of that, I am able to sit here and talk to you about this work that I've done over the past 25 years. I thank God for the opportunity. There was a 12-step program around, and the third step of that program said to turn my will and my life over to the care of God as I understood him. And I did just that. And ultimately, this is the result of that. We got registered with the Georgia Secretary of State's office as well in 1999. So we not only got our nonprofit status, which is essential, but we also got registered with the Georgia Secretary of State. In fact, you had to do that before we got our nonprofit status. We are licensed by the state of Georgia as a substance abuse treatment program. We are an intensive outpatient program. And what that means is that there are people that are coming to our program are getting 20 hours of orchestrated and formal treatment services every week. And the state of Georgia licensed us to do that on an outpatient basis. But we also have transitional housing. The housing is only for those people who are part of our programs and services. We're located right here, Covington Highway, 3486, Covington Highway here in Decatur. And as I mentioned earlier, we've been doing this work for a long time. We are in the trenches for a long time. So what's co-occurring? I talked about intensive outpatient treatment services earlier. So what's co-occurring? And I'm giving you this backdrop, a little bit of content about who we are, so you can see how the grants that we ask for and the things that we ask for are directly related to the work we do. So it doesn't make a lot of sense to ask for grants that's outside your purview. If it's stuff that you're doing every day, then it makes sense that you should be able to apply for grants that's associated with your primary purpose and your mission and vision statements. Co-occurring disorders. These are individuals that come to us who have both mental health challenges and substance use challenges. In fact, it's kind of hard these days to find someone who is in substance abuse treatment. And when I say substance abuse treatment, that includes alcohol. All drugs, all the drugs, alcohol included, and some of these popular drugs that people are using that they don't seem to think that it is habitual. But it includes all of those things. We work with the formerly incarcerated. We have a reentry program that has been quite successful for a long time. What makes it successful? Well, we found that our name is written on some of them walls in some of them South Georgia prisons. So if you're trying to get some help coming home, reach out to Stand Incorporated, and they'll be able to help you. We get plenty of letters, plenty of mail every day from folks incarcerated in some of those institutions. We did that over time. We partnered with some very critical service providers in the state of Georgia, some to help with their legal issues in coming home. There's a program called Georgia Justice Project. They help a lot with that. I won't go into detail with that, but that's what makes us good, is that we have great relationships in the community with other programs and services. We have a peer-led recovery support services. So it's one thing to get drug-free, another thing to stay drug-free. So we have what we call an ARC, Addiction Recovery Support Center. So once people are leaving our program on the formal side, meaning that they're getting these services, treatment services, individual counseling sessions, and on and on and on, now they're able to touch bases with our recovery support folks. These folks are special because all the people involved in this are people with lived experience, meaning that there are people like myself who have gone through a lot of issues with drugs and alcohol, but have been drug-free for a long, long time. It's been more than 30 years since I picked up a drink or a drug, and I just want to say that. But it also makes this picture very clear for me in terms of what it takes in order for an individual to stop using and what it takes for an individual to stay stopped. And that's been the platform from which I began this work back in 1999. So the transitional housing I mentioned earlier, that housing process is only meant for people who are involved in our program. We're not a homeless program. We don't provide homeless services. Only for people who are coming into the program who don't have a safe, structured, supportive place to live. And because of outside funding, state funding, and some federal funding, we're able to provide that housing for them free of charge for a period of up to 6 months in some situations. We do a lot of work with domestic violence on the perpetrator side, not on the victim side. I was fortunate enough to be the author of an intervention manual some time ago. But we take that intervention manual and we weave that work into our daily programming. So folks are coming home out of these institutions or out of these crisis centers, they get a full menu of services. And we use those services in our grant applications as well. HIV/AIDS, counseling, testing, and referral. We've also been doing that since the beginning. We've been doing that in this community and in other counties. We provide that same service. All right, so I don't know who's in the room, but I'm gonna take this from a very basic standpoint. So first-time grant seekers, if you're first time trying to apply for grants, you gotta have registration. You gotta be registered with grants.gov. That's one of the first things that needs to happen after you've gotten your Secretary of State credentials, after you've got your 501c3 or all your licensure stuff is in place. Then you can reach out to make sure that you're registered with grants.gov. That's one of the most important things that you can do. But I can't emphasize enough that all of the other infrastructure, I'll use that word, all the other infrastructure, agency infrastructure stuff that you need has to be in place. So you got to have a license, right? You need to have and call for accreditation, the JCO accreditation is going to be important as well. Meaning that as you apply for grants, it's going to be important that the grantor is able to see that you are able to do the work. Not only able in terms of skill set, but that you've passed all of the markers for them to say that you are not only successful, but that you are legitimate. That's going to be important. Grants.gov is a valuable resource. They have a whole lot of how-to blogs. I won't go into details with that, but if you log in there, you'll get a plethora of information about how to. So not to be intimidated, but take your team or yourself and get onto grants.gov and you'll be able to see some of the information that they offer you. I also have YouTube demonstrations as well, real basic how-to things. as you go through the process, grants.gov is going to require you to get an authorized organization. An assigned authorized organization representative. That person is going to be your AOR. And that's going to be important as you begin to think about applying for grants, because you're going to be the point person. And you apply for that position or that authorization through grants.gov. Also, you got to register with the National Institute of Health, ERA Commons. That website is sitting right there at the bottom of the screen on this slide, era.nih.gov. These registrations are critical. You cannot proceed without them. So as you think about applying for grants, and those of you who applied for grants before, you already know that. You have to have those certifications or those authorizations in place. You got to determine if you're eligible to respond to any federal opportunity. Grants.gov, I have attached myself to their website, so any grant that comes out, any FOA, and that's a notice of funding opportunity. Anyone that comes out, it comes to my email address. You can arrange that on grants.gov website as well, so you don't have to search every day all the time. You can actually set yourself up in that portal. So whenever grants come out that are central to what you want to do and what you're doing, they will hit your email box, and that's a wonderful tool. It keeps you from doing a lot of work with searching and looking for grants on a regular basis. I want to say also that specific application forms and packages and access to that is on grants.gov in their workspace as well. With every grant opportunity comes a package. It allows you to see exactly what you need. I'm going to go through some of that in just a moment. It allows you to see exactly what you need in order to apply for a particular grant. So that can be found at the grants.gov worksite in their, what they call their workspace. And in addition to workspace, it allows you to collaborate with other folks on your team in that same workspace. So you guys could actually be working on the same grant together. It's a beautiful tool. If you're going to be doing grant writing, it's a beautiful tool. So familiarize yourself with grants.gov or ERA Assist. Let me say this, they're not accepting paper applications and submissions, but of course you know that. That's old school. For me, we used to have to create the original in 5 copies, the original in 6 and all of that. But all of this, all of the application process is now automated. It's all electronic, and all of your uploads are going to be PDFs if you are going to be applying. Okay, so what's in the application package? Now, let me just say, back up a little bit. Everything I'm talking about now is relative to SAMHSA. SAMHSA is the one provider or the one grantor that I've been successful with the most. So I chose their process to talk to you a little bit about not grant writing, but the process of applying for grants. And each grantor has different requirements. So if you're going to be applying to NIH, CDC, DOJ, it's just a number of them, depending upon what your mission and vision is all about. But on grants.gov, they'll tell you everything that's needed in the package if you're planning on applying. Okay, so one of the things in the SAMHSA package is, and it may be the same thing in other packages as well, is a standard form 424. So you'll find in that form is all of your particular information, your name, organization name, what district you're serving from, who's on your board, who's your board chair, and who is the business manager for your organization, and of course that AOR, that authorized representative that I talked about in the previous slide. All that's on your 424 on that page. You'll identify your grant, you'll identify the title of your grant, and a brief explanation of what your grant's about. Not very long at all. That work comes in later. Also in that portal, all this is electronic. In the ERA Commons, you'll find in the ERA Commons platform. Remember before I said you got to get logged in and registered with grants.gov and ERA Commons. Well, this is where this SAMHSA application actually gets filled out. It's in the EAR Commons portal. And it prompts you through the whole thing. Once you complete the 424, it'll take you right to the next page of that. And that's your standard form 424A. That's your budget information. And this is going to be a PDF when you upload it. No, I'm sorry. This is going to be coming off of your PDF as you populate this 424 and 424A. These forms are fillables on that website. Later on, you'll have to upload all of this stuff as a PDF, but right now, these are fillables. If you don't have an accountant on your team, you got to have somebody good with numbers. Got to have somebody good with numbers, fringe benefits, personnel costs, everything that you're going to need. In that 424A, it asks you questions about personnel, about fringes, asks you information about equipment. It asks you information about travel and other costs. So it's about 5 different categories that it asks you about how much money you're asking for in those areas. Next, in that same portal, we're still talking about ERA Commons, and we're still talking about the SAMHSA application, and you're on the 3rd section of that response. That's your project narrative. And in ERA Commons, you're going to have to upload your project narrative into their portals. That means you will have already prepared your narrative. What's your narrative? So your narrative is telling the grantor not only who you are, but what do you plan to do? And how do you plan to do it? And it needs to be thought out thoroughly. Let me just say that. It needs to be thought out thoroughly where it makes sense, because you're going to be getting other readers to take a look at what you're proposing to do. And what you're proposing to do needs to be a reflection of what the grant announcement is about. The notice of funding opportunity spells out exactly what SAMHSA or other providers are asking for. They're asking for your response about this particular issue. And your project narrative has to be in focus of that particular issue that the notice of funding opportunity is responding to. So your narrative and the opportunity has to match up. It has to make sense. Now you got budget and budget justification. So we early in this talk, a couple of bullets before, I talked about the budget information. Now we're talking about the budget justification and the narrative. So in this section, it's required for you not only to talk about the budget, but each line item and the justification for it. Why do you need $50,000 for a project coordinator salary? And it's required that you put that in the budget justification. Why do you need $6,000 for travel? You have to put that in the budget justification. How much is your rent? What percentage of your rent does this SAMHSA grant cover? These are some of the things that are going to be very, very important, because when you look at the financial people who are responsible for giving you this grant or responsible for the money, they're going to ask you all of these questions, and they're going to want the detail about how you plan on spending that money. These are line item budgets that you are preparing. And line item budgets are really critical because you have to use them the way that you wrote them in the beginning. There is a process by which you may be able to move money, a certain percentage of the money from one line item to another, but that's another talk. For right now, we're going to focus on the fact that everything you put in this grant has to be a line item and it has to have a justification attached to it. If I was in the room, I would be checking in with you. I'll be looking at you and I'll be saying, are there any questions? But we'll get to that a little later because I know I'm covering a lot of information. Okay, so what else is in the package? Letters of commitment and evidence of credentials for the organization who was applying. Remember earlier I said get all of your certifications in place, your licenses and CARF accreditation, JCO accreditations. This is what this is. This is one of 9 attachments that you're going to have to pull together. That information is going to say Stand Incorporated, and it's going to talk about our 25 years of doing this work. And I'm going to present our CARF accreditation and other credentials of experience. I'm going to put that in attachment 1. So these are PDFs that I'm going to put under attachment 1. And let me talk about letters of commitment. No longer are, well, I'm gonna say no longer are any of them, but specifically SAMHSA is not accepting letters of support. There's a difference between a letter of support and a letter of commitment. So in your conversations with your collaborators, make sure that they send you a letter of commitment. So what is that? They're telling you exactly what they're going to do in detail about supporting your grant application. They're going to make referrals to you. They're going to have you a part of a review team. They on and on and on. These are things that they're going to do in terms of making a commitment to make sure that your proposal not only is successful, but that you can do the work after you get grant funded. So that's what's important. Data collection instruments. So data collection is important. So how people know if their programs are working? It's data collection, being able to utilize the process by which you are collecting data. SAMHSA is unique in that they have their own tool. It's called a GIPRA. And that GIPRA tool is administered at baseline, at exit, and at follow-up. At 3 different occasions, you're collecting data from the people that's in your program. And what we're looking for is the process of change. Are your participants getting better as a result of the work that you're doing? And that GIPRA data is going to be critical for you to make sure that you have the kind of people that you've hired, that you got on your team that can make sure that that GIPRA data is collected and collected regularly. Sample consent forms. Consents to treatment are important. The participants who you are providing services for has to know in detail what they're signing up for. And that signature on the signature block has to be there for every participant. But let me say, the people who are going to be reviewing your grant, they're going to be looking at that consent form to make sure that it's detailed enough that the person that's signing up for that understands that they're not in any danger, that you're not putting them in any danger, and that there are going to be some rewards associated with them participating in the program. And when I say rewards, I'm not talking about monetary rewards, although sometimes you're able to provide stipends, but I'm talking about value-based reward. And you have to spell that out in the consent and let folks know that they're not coerced into it, that they are voluntarily participating in this program. What else is in these attachments? Your project timeline. Some SAMHSA grants are 3 years, some SAMHSA grants are 4, some are 5. We've been fortunate enough to have 5-year SAMHSA grants. So the project timeline has to go from right now in 2023, 5 years, and I have to create their project timeline. What's in that is when you're going to hire folks. When are you going to be collecting data? Who's going to collect it? And all of that has to be in a table called a project timeline. The notion of trying to tell you how that should look is too much for this talk. But there are project timelines, templates out there all over the place. A little bit of Googling will get you that. Biographical sketches and position descriptions are going to be important. All your key personnel, there's going to be key personnel that these SAMHSA grants are going to be asking you for. So who are key personnel? Key personnel is the project director, who's also known in the federal world as your principal investigator. Your key personnel is going to be your project coordinator and your evaluator. And we're going to be talking about that evaluator and how important it is as we continue in our talk. I'm looking around trying to make sure that I'm within my 30 minutes. So the biographical sketches and position descriptions are important. Letters to the single state authority. So in the state of Georgia, at DBHDD is Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Disability. Because I do behavioral health work, we have a single state agency. And I have to send them a letter telling them what I'm going to do and how many people are involved and the value to the community. That's in attachment 6. Attachment 7 is confidentiality and participant protections, human subjects. That's another important document. You can't play around with that document because it also spells out the fact that you're not putting folks in harm. You're not bringing people in, and you can cause harm, excuse me, in other ways other than physical harm. There is abuse that happens all the time in certain grants and in the facilitation of certain grants where it's psychological, emotional, or even trauma-driven, because you don't know what's in a person's backstory. So you have to be careful with that. The important thing I want you to remember about this particular document is that it also has to be very detailed about how you're going to protect the people that are in your program. And obviously, you got to have documentation of your nonprofit status. You would have done that earlier because you certainly at this point qualified for nonprofit status. And you certainly qualify because you have been certified by your state. Inside of SAMHSA's website, they have something they call charitable choice, assurance that you're going to comply with what SAMHSA rules and regulations are. And that's what that is. All these forms, well, not all these forms, this particular form is in the public domain. All you got to do is Google it. It'll pop up for you. These letters of single state, you got to create it. Your confidentiality, you got to create it. Your nonprofit status obviously comes from the federal government. And so does some of the other, I won't go back, but some of the other documents that you have are things that you have to create. All right, so you've done all that work. Now, wow, I just got an award. I got a notice of award in the mail. Your grant application has been approved. So I want to applaud you, but I also want to caution you because the work has just begun. Everything that you said in that application, now you got to do it. Review the notice of award thoroughly because the notice of award will spell out certain things that are definitely required of you as you continue to facilitate this grant award. Approved budget amount. Look to see how much money is involved in that. Make sure the dollar amount is correct. There's a section in your notice of award called terms and conditions. And pay close attention to that because they may have awarded you, but they've also given you certain terms that you have to fulfill within a certain length of time. The grant award is also going to talk about your key staff. If you've named 3 people as your key staff, they're going to list them. Make sure that it's correct. It's going to talk to you about annual programmatic progress reports. Every year, if you get a 3-year, 2-year, 5-year, every year you got to do a programmatic progress report. And also there are annual reporting requirements. All that is spelled out in your notice of award. So get the document in your hand, sit down with your team, and y'all go through it page by page so that you'll make sure that you are aware and able to comply with what they're asking you for. I don't know about you, but I've been doing this a long time, and I don't like the idea of jail. So waste, fraud, and abuse will set you up if you're not careful with this federal money. Any money, the state money, federal money, foundation dollars, waste, fraud, and abuse is real. And I can't talk about that enough. Back to this accountant that you've hired or should hire, or that person that's in your circle and who can be responsible enough to help you stay honest with these dollars. You can't take this money and do something else with it. You do what you say you're going to do with the dollars. That's what's important. It's important for you and it's important for the people coming behind you. Remember your budget line items, because as you spend that money down, you're also subtracting from that total amount that you said you needed to do that particular job. Access to funds. We have a payment management system in the federal system. So in the payment management system, you can draw down the money that you need. It's not like you have to go ask for it. You ask for $500,000 each month or twice a month, however often you want to go get that money to make sure that the project is done. They will allow you to do that. But be careful, because as easy as it is to go get, you got to be careful because you're going to be accountable for every nickel that you draw down. That's what, and the next bullet says that accounting processes should include reconciliation at least every quarter. Go back and make sure you reconcile that, just like your checkbook. Make sure you're doing everything you're supposed to do with these folks' dollars. Backup for your expenses. If you buy a computer, have the backup for it. Where's the paperwork? Make sure you have it on file. If you buy whatever you buy in your equipment line item, you make sure you keep the paperwork that's associated with it. So the goals and objectives, the proposal review, you got to review that. What you said you were going to do, how you said you were going to do it, what are your goals? And I'm going to just bounce through the next couple of slides so I can make room for our other presenter. hiring your staff. Don't just go get your cousin. Make sure you get people who are qualified to do the job, because you're going to need that, because the work is on the ground. You need people to show up every day, whatever time your program opens, and they got to show up with passion, they got to show up with commitment, and they got to show up caring about the people they serve. You got to have meeting with all your stakeholders. Everybody you put in that grant table is going to help you. Pull them together, buy them lunch, and let's talk about this grant you just got and how we can continue to collaborate and cooperate in the facilitation of it. You're going to have an evaluator, and that person is critical. And typically, that's, in my case, has been PhD level folks who do this as a practice. So they'll help you with evaluation, process evaluation, meaning that as the process goes on, they're evaluating every step you take. Because sometimes things don't work out exactly as you thought they would. And you got to have the ability to do process evaluation so you can make mid-course corrections, meaning that it's not going as well as you had intended. And don't hide that, talk about that, so that you can make sure you get the work done. Data reports, all those reporting requirements are embedded in these applications. So you know when you're supposed to report and what you're supposed to report. Social media is important. I have to tell you about that, because acknowledging or announcing the fact that you got this grant money, people will come from all over. Some people will come just to see what they can get from you. Some people will come to help you. So be mindful of how you post and what you post in terms of social media. Wow. Okay, don't forget your why. Why did you do this work? Why did you sign on to do this work? Now you got $500,000, $200,000, $300,000 a year for the next 3 years. Don't forget why you do it, because I promise you, there are going to be days when everything you put on that paper is going to go absolutely the wrong way. And you got to remember why you're doing the work as you look in the faces of the people you're trying to serve. If you're not trying to serve people, then I'll ask you the question of your why. That's my information down at the bottom of this page. I'm open to email anytime that you want to reach out to me. It's a lot of information that's shared. Some of it requires a bit more detail than what I was able to share with you today. So at this point, I'm going to stop my share. And I don't know, Candace, if you want to bring on the other speaker or how you want to do this. But thank you so much for allowing me to share.
Yes, thank you so much. So we're going to bring on the other speaker with the EPA.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I'm J. Kyle Bryant, and I'm with the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, Region 4 headquarters based in Atlanta, Georgia. I work in the Strategic Programs Office in the Environmental Justice and Children's Health section. And I'm going to pull my presentation up now. Make sure everyone can see that. Just a little background. I'm going to be sharing some helpful tips on, let's see how they do. Some tips on developing fundable proposals. My background, I'm a trained physical scientist, an alumnus of Fort Valley State University in Fort Valley, Georgia, HBCU, the 1890 Land Grant Institution for the great state of Georgia. And I thank Mr. Sperling for his presentation. I also would like to thank Congressman Johnson for the opportunity to speak to this audience about fundable proposals. My background, even though I am a trained scientist, I'm also a certified grant writing instructor and grants management specialist. I was one of the first grant writing specialists in the Office of Sponsored Programs at my alma mater at Fort Valley State when they opened up their grants office. So I want to share some insights on what I see from that viewpoint, as well as through the lens of what I do for the EPA. I've been with the EPA for over 16 years now, and I work with communities around the issues involving environmental justice, which is a critical issue. If those who aren't familiar with that term, it really deals with the fair and equitable treatment of all communities without regards to race, color, creed, national origin, or religion, but focused on environmental issues. And that's a very broad spectrum. It's not just about uh, plants and animals and wildlife. It's about landfills. It's about economic revitalization in blighted areas. It's about a whole lot of things. So I'm going to get into that as I go through my presentation. I'll first start with an introductory thought. Anything that is sustainable must mimic a process already found in nature. And what I mean by that is nothing just happens. Everything has a process, including grantsmanship. If you want to learn about writing fundable proposals and getting into the funding pipelines with the federal government, you have to understand some basic principles first. And just like anything, if you want to have young people grow up approaching and entering into STEM careers, science, technology, engineering, and math, you don't just get engineers one day. It starts with the seeds, the young kids in primary school, teaching them about math and introductory approaches to scientific concepts. And then they grow into mastering that, and then they can handle more advanced mathematics and STEM disciplines. So by the time they reach high school, they're not afraid of it. And then they are interested in focusing on specific areas of STEM, like the health careers, medicine, engineering, the physical sciences, the environmental sciences, so on and so forth, so that one day you can reap the harvest in the future when they're fully educated and can embrace all the concepts that they've learned over a period of time. So the same thing is true for grantsmanship. It takes some time, but I'm going to try to fast track some of this through this abbreviated presentation I'll share with you today. First, we want you to get the most out of this session by understanding the big picture, as in what do you need to know to get started. And don't sweat the details, though. The goal is to give you some basic strategies to learn how to get from the details what you need when you need them. Some of the objectives we want to look at are, as Mr. Sperling alluded to on his last slide, it's on this slide for me, it's what's your why? Why do you want to write a fundable proposal? Why do you want to get funded? And we're going to have a better understanding of how to answer that question. We're also going to identify some sources of support and assistance, the funding mechanisms, and the best role for you or your organization. We want to start also by outlining an approach. In other words, what are your proposal writing strengths and what are your challenges? Have you asked yourself that question? What is your area of interest? Are you interested in STEM programs? Are you interested in programming for the youth or teaching financial literacy or perhaps supporting an elderly cause in your community? But help streamline your ideas on what your central focus will be. What need are you trying to address in your community? Understand that grants are for charitable causes. It's not so you can get a new Mercedes or get a new roof on your old house. It's for something that will benefit people in your community or a broad swath of people in your community. It's not for an individual's personal needs. So what topics are most important? Budget preparation? Is it understanding how to write a problem statement or understanding what the methodology is asking for? We're going to talk about some of these things, but these are just initial thoughts that you should be pondering. Other things to consider are, before you launch into the proposal development process, consider the following questions. Do you have sufficient time to prepare a high quality proposal? Are the facilities and space available to you appropriate and sufficient for the project that you're proposing? And does the sponsor or funding institution allow full recovery of facilities and administrative costs, or also known as indirect costs? These are things like workers' compensation, insurance, things like that. Does the sponsor require any cost sharing of direct costs? That's also critical to know also. What strings are attached? Well, first, you must help all of the people in the target group, regardless of faith or political persuasion. And you cannot use federal government's money to recruit members for your church or your nonprofit organization. In terms of planning ahead, once you have identified a funding opportunity from one of the federal agencies or a foundation, you should obtain and review the guidelines and all other materials pertinent to preparing a proposal for that particular sponsor. I would encourage each of you to participate in any pre-award technical trainings offered by that particular funding agency. Most agencies, when they have a notice of funding availability, a NOFA, as Mr. Sperling alluded to, some agencies call it something different. They might call it a RFA, a request for applications, or an RFP, a request for proposals, but it means the same thing essentially. But when they offer a new grant out, they will often host a pre-award technical training or workshop to answer your questions about this new grant. If it uses terminology you're unfamiliar with, how much they are funding for, how many years is funding for, how many grants they are awarding. This is all critical information that you should avail yourself of. As far as a cheat sheet, I have the next few slides for you to consider also. You want to ask, will the agency fund your specific needs for the project you're interested in? You don't want to say, apply for, say, an agricultural grant to the Small Business Administration. Not to say that it can't be done, but there are more appropriate federal agencies that would have funds that are aligned with that particular type of project, more like the U.S. Department of Agriculture, something like that. But so always sort of give some thought to the agency you're applying to. You shouldn't never apply blindly to an agency without some thought of what they fund typically. Next, you want to ask, what are the eligibility requirements? These notice of funding availabilities will always tell you who's eligible to apply for these funds. If these funds for a specific grant are aimed towards, say, historically Black colleges and universities, or for at-risk community groups or community groups that support at-risk youth, then if that's your target audience who you are planning to support, then that's the grant you should apply for. Always look at how many pages they ask for in the announcement and what font you should use, and should it be double spaced. These are all critical things that just let the funding agency know whether you can follow instructions and read clearly, because that will, if you don't meet those basic criteria points, and if they ask you for 20 exact pages for your proposal and you give them 25, they might just totally overlook your proposal because you didn't follow those basic instructions. You also want to find out, are there any priorities or preferences listed by the agency? A preference may be something for a specific subset of the population, like it focuses on women's issues or teens issues or the disabled or disadvantaged communities. When an announcement speaks about a priority, it means that the priority, the applicant's score is enhanced by speaking to the priority. In other words, say if a grant announcement comes out and it says, we're looking to fund grants that target teenage sexual abstinence or something like that, to reduce teenage pregnancies, then you have to speak to that specific audience, not just teens in general, but if that is an issue in the community that you're serving, speak directly to that priority and how your program or project is going to try to mitigate that or reduce the incidences of teenage pregnancies. You also want to ask how many awards will the agency grant, because you have to evaluate whether it's worth your time and the resources necessary to produce a proposal. If they're only awarding, say, 5 grants, but they're distributing it through the entire Southeast region, like Region 4 of EPA is 8 states. It's as far north as Kentucky, as far west as Mississippi, and all the Southeast. So if they're only giving 5 awards out in that entire region, you have to wonder if it's worth your while, if you're a novice at writing proposals, whether you're going to spend the quality time needed to get a proposal funded, or will you just look for another opportunity? Next, you're going to ask, are there any matching requirements? And some funders do this as well. They will say, okay, we're giving out $50,000 for this specific grant, but we're asking for a 50% match from anyone who gets awarded this grant. That means you have to have $25,000 to add to their grant should you be awarded. And you have to read the fine print, because in some cases, agencies will not accept that you're offering in-kind contributions. An in-kind contribution is where you're offering just the labor of the staff from your program, as if you're the chief executive officer of your community-based organization, your 501c3 nonprofit, and you say, well, I'm going to donate half my time to this project, and I make $50,000 a year typically, so I'm donating $25,000 of my salary pro bono just to get this award. Some agencies will accept that as a fair exchange, but others will not. So make sure you read the fine print before you apply for something, because if you're awarded a grant and then you can't meet that match, then they have the right to withdraw it and re-award it to someone else. Also, don't forget to plan your work and work your plan. What I mean by that, it's always a good idea to have an outline of, and just sort of write down what it is that you want to do and how you plan to do it, and then find the funding source that can meet that specific need of yours, and sort of lay out in your mind and then put it on paper, pen to paper with you and your organization. Okay, this grant is due to be awarded, say, in December of this calendar year. So that means we can't start until after the award is made. So when would we start this grant? In January, or would we do the marketing and outreach in January and actually plan the work in February? Things like that. You also want to discuss equipment and where it's going to be housed. And this is critical. I work with many nonprofit groups. Many churches have community development corporations or small environmental justice community-based groups. You've seen people get into the biggest arguments over equipment. I wrote a grant once for an organization, and it was just for equipment. It wasn't for any monetary amount, but it was $20,000 worth of equipment. It was for office management support of a startup environmental group. And so they got like a copy machine, and they got a laptop and a projector and a camcorder and a fax machine. So it was all very helpful to get them operational, up and running. But there was a big infighting between members of the board of that organization who got to keep the laptop, or was it something that everyone was supposed to share equitably? So make sure you have those discussions internally if you're asking for equipment, or you're even asking for funds to purchase certain levels of equipment, where it's going to be housed. If it's going to be in an office space that you all are renting, is it going to be in someone else's house in their personal possession? And what's the understanding of how it is to be used? Another distinction to be made is, as far as the federal grants are concerned, is anything that costs less than $5,000 is not equipment. It's considered a supply. So if you're going to, say, teach computer skills to elderly citizens at a senior citizens home and have an intergenerational training, like with young students from high school teaching elderly people how to like set up an email account so they can converse with their family wherever they are, and you're going to provide the laptops for them to do that, then most laptops are very inexpensive and very cost effective nowadays, and the software to get them fully equipped, you can do it fairly cheaply nowadays. So even with internet access, it's far less than $5,000 for a computer. So you might be able to get enough computers to, fill up a classroom for under $5,000 and be able to utilize them as supplies on your grant. So it's all in how you write things. Meanwhile, if you were to, say, buy a server that supported those laptops, that might cost you up to $3,000 or so. But if you needed more than one, then those are considered equipment. Then it's over $5,000 for that same specific piece of equipment. You also want to solidify partnering relationships early in the process through letters of support and letters of commitment, as Mr. Sperling also mentioned. Letters of support are still good, but for most federal grants, they want you to have those letters of support that specifically state how that supporting entity is going to be contributing to your project. So proposal development and grant writing is a lot like baking a cake or making an apple pie. So you have to follow the recipe. So the first thing you need to do is introduce your organization's previous successes. This is in the introduction phase, or the problem statement phase, or the narrative phase. You want to also describe your group's qualifications as an applicant for funding. You want to establish, set yourself apart on why you are uniquely qualified as an organization to apply for these grant funds. And in an application to a foundation or a federal agency, you want to be as extensive as allowed in the introduction or the background statement. Next, you want to gather your ingredients. These are the rationale, problem statement, justification, statement of needs, or assessment of needs. All of these terms are synonymous, but when funders use these terms, they want hard data. And by hard data, we mean we want it to be compared on at least 2 levels to illustrate your need. And one way you do that is by introducing what I call wow statements. Your narrative or your problem statement is where you want to really draw people in, the reviewer, into your story and why the situation is so dire that you need these funds. The basic parts of a proposal are as follows: your introduction, your rationale, your methodology, key personnel, evaluation, and budget. Now, I normally take a half a day, a 4-hour workshop to teach the details of each of these sections. But for this abbreviated presentation, I'm just going to go through some of the highlights. In the introduction, this clearly establishes who is applying for the funds, who you are as an organization. You want to describe your purposes and goals. You want to describe your programs and activities. And this leads logically to the problem statement, the problem that you're trying to solve. It is as brief as possible. And like I said, it uses interesting or wow statements. Like you can say, I'm getting sound on this. Forgive me for a moment. I'm sorry, I don't know what's going on. Forgive me. I don't know what happened with that. But okay, but like I said, it's interesting and it's free of jargon. You can say that your organization, say, I don't know, let's call it Helping Hands Incorporated is the only community organization that services the needs of at-risk youth in South Fulton, Georgia. You know, and that's somewhat of a wow statement. Or you can, but another wow statement like you would use in an introduction would be like you would introduce the problem. You could say, according to published literature from, say, the Fulton County Board of Education, over 75% of high school graduates in South Fulton County cannot read at the appropriate grade level upon graduation. And that makes a reviewer sit back and say, wow, that's an amazing number. What do you propose to do about it? And then that'll encourage them to read more. So that's how you establish an introduction and a problem statement. Under your program objectives, I encourage you not to use words like to provide or to establish or to create, but instead use words like to increase, to decrease, to reduce, because it indicates measurable objectives. So in other words, in this proposal, we plan to increase the number of students who can read at the appropriate grade level by graduation, or we plan to decrease the number of students who drop out of high school through this program, or we plan to reduce the amount of litter on our campus by implementing this recycling program. When you blend the ingredients, that's like telling the funder how you'll address your needs and objectives to achieve the desired outcome. And the methodology, the terms may be different, but you always want to concentrate on the how you will address a particular issue. Look for these terms. These are all synonymous: methodology, implementation, strategy, plan of operation, statement of work, description of work. Different agencies use these terms interchangeably. It depends on if it's a technically oriented agency, they might use terms like statement of work or strategy, but they all mean the same thing, to talk about the how you plan to do something. When discussing key personnel in this section, you're going to discuss the persons who will be paid through the grant. Why are they qualified to manage this program? Include a job description if you haven't found a person to manage a key component of the program yet, like a bookkeeper or accountant or something like that. Just say, to be determined, and then give a description, like a job description, a position description of what that person's skill sets would be to occupy that specific position. 6 deadly phrases to avoid in proposals. Best efforts. That's a legal requirement to go beyond normal duty. Ensure. That's a binding legal agreement. Guarantee. It amounts to a warranty. Partner or partnership. It assumes liability for each other's acts, debts, and omissions. So make sure if you do have a partnership and you use that terminology, that all sides that are part of that partnership understand what that means. Or don't use terms like will meet your needs / requirements, because that holds you liable. Or joint or jointly, that means ownership will be shared by other parties. Once again, if you use that term, make sure that all parties understand what that means to them legally. In developing evaluation strategies, you can use pre- and post-test assessments, focus groups, satisfaction surveys, and so on. Like this is a satisfaction survey. It says a satisfaction survey will be administered to 3 groups: students, teachers, and the participating schools and parents. Using a Likert scale, participants will be asked to report experiences with the new mathematics program and related activities. Frequencies will be generated. The data will be reported in a summary document and submit it to participating schools, the project director, educational partners, and interested parties for use in planning improvements in future programs. So it's just a simple blurb to say how you will evaluate the success or failure of your proposed project. Also, I encourage you to use graphics in your proposals. This can be, by the way, charts like made in PowerPoint or Excel, organizational chart, project workflow diagrams, decision-making charts, using a table like for logic models to illustrate timelines, or a skill matrix, which is basically a table that shows what skill sets your project leaders have and your staff have, and your staffing loads, how much time will be spent by each particular type of staff to facilitate and conduct elements of your proposal or elements of your project. You can always use figures, financial and statistical figures, and pictures are always great. If you're going to talk about serving at-risk youth in your community or revitalizing a ballpark or playground in your community, well, show pictures of that blighted community already, or that blighted ball field that you want to restore. That's a picture's worth 1,000 words, and that's one great way to get your point across of the critical need. When it comes to budget, there's a two-part budget. There's the summary budget and the budget narrative. For a summary budget, the basic categories are shown in summary, and you arrange the material so that the numbers line up. And the budget narrative is more narrative, or like a paragraph. It discusses why you need each line item and include the numbers again. In developing the budget under direct cost, you want to look at things like personnel, salary, the fringe benefits like workman's comp, insurance, vacation, Social Security, pension, etc., and other direct costs, like if you have to hire a consultant to help you write your proposal, any travel that's required. Many grants will tell you that, okay, well, as part of this grant, you must budget in time to travel to at least 2 of our national conferences because they might want you to present your progress at that event and to network. Also, again, for equipment and supplies and for any subcontracts you may have. Indirect costs are, like I said, are like facility and administrative costs, which are things that you, like many people, overlook. Like if you have office space, but you have to pay rent, you have to pay for utilities and things like that. Those are indirect costs. Also, you want to share matching cost sharing. Matching and cost sharing are not required on contracts, but they are in some cases required on grants. And here's just an example, a screenshot of how you would design your budget. You would use Excel, something like this, a spreadsheet format. And if you didn't have a particular person identified, you can list the range of persons in a particular category, like this as environmental scientists. And if it's someone who is highly educated and very well experienced, they're a high-end person. So this is their cost range that you would provide for someone who came that highly credentialed. Then someone who was mid-level would be less than that, and entry level would be even less than that. And so you would do the same thing for if the personnel were an accountant or a bookkeeper or office staff, an administrative type. But that's the way federal agencies like to see the information presented. So it's easy to follow. Some budget no-nos that you need to be aware of that are math errors, number one, or if there's no justification or no clear role for personnel that you have in your budget or consultants, or if you have a 3rd-year request for equipment on a 3-year grant, typically that's a red flag for federal reviewers. They usually like to see equipment purchased in the 1st or 2nd year of a 3-year grant, never in the final year of a grant, should you be making big ticket purchases on equipment and things like that. If your budget exceeds an allowable amount, that's also a no-no, or the budget was insufficient. Sometimes people, they think they're have a better chance of being funded if they just ask for a small amount. Say, we're we're giving out this $50,000 grant, but you only applied for 20,000, but you plan on doing $50,000 worth of work. We say you can't do it. We don't see how you can do it for that amount. So you will probably do yourself more harm during that evaluation than good by trying to save money. It's always best to write your proposal for the budgeted amount, how much they're funding it for. If they're giving out 10 grants for $100,000, don't make your grant proposal for $999,000. Make it for the full $100,000. And last, if the forms are incomplete, if you don't understand something, that's why you should attend those pre-award technical trainings. You can have a conversation with the project officer from the responding agency, and they can answer your questions so that you don't have any incomplete forms, because that will only harm your final score and you'd stand a chance of not being funded. Also, make the reviewer remember your organization. The justification or rationale or needs assessment is one of the most critical parts of the proposal. You should use statistics and data from authoritative sources and testimony from persons known to be knowledgeable about the situation, whatever the project calls for, in order to make the reviewer remember your data. Avoid the big no-nos, which are failing to follow the directions. You read the announcement or the RFA or the NOFA, the Notice of Funding Availability, thoroughly and follow the directions to the letter. Or don't try to hide service programs as research. Don't apply for projects beyond your training or expertise. Don't ask for too much or too little money. Don't fail to obtain the organization's permission. Don't go rogue and say your executive director didn't know anything about it and you thought you'd surprise them. Say, look, I got us this $1 million grant. That can be a blessing and a curse. Also, don't try to write a $1 million proposal in 3 days. Some people have tried that and failed miserably. Take your time with it so you don't miss anything, because when you rush, you make mistakes. Don't forget to give the agency or foundation what it wants or what it asks for, saying we're seeking to fund X number of organizations that work in this specific area or to serve at-risk youth in the Southeast. So don't give them something from another community that's outside of their target area that they're actually focusing on for that grant announcement. Don't find money to pay your salary. It has to be about the greater good in the community, not just a salary for you, but actually doing the much needed charitable work in these communities. And don't apply blindly to an announcement. Coming up near the end here, conducting the literature search for your proposal content. You can look for journals, specialty libraries like from the National Library of Medicine, conference proceedings, institute homepages, and government publications to get a lot of background information on the topic that you're going to be addressing. Because when you get information from scholarly articles, it strengthens your proposal. It shows that you're well read on the topic. How do you find these resources? Google.com. Last tips for everyone. Be specific and avoid buzzwords and jargon. Everyone doesn't understand your acronyms, like many people get confused on governmental acronyms, which we're known for. But if you have specific language that is known, common speak for the community you serve, don't assume that everyone understands that lingo. And so if you are going to use jargon, please include a glossary for jargon and acronyms. And don't take it personal if you don't get funded the first time around, but prepare to give up having a life for about 2 months for first timers and 2 weeks for experienced proposal developers. Lastly, here's a proposal checklist and evaluation form I developed. I'd like you, for those with a smartphone, to pull out your smartphones now and take a photo of this QR code. You can scan this QR code, and it's a helpful resource to guide you as you develop your proposal. It will ask you iterative questions about what you've included or haven't included in your proposal to see if you're on track. And if you can answer yes to most of those questions, during your proposal development, then you should be in good shape by the time it's time to submit. And that's my presentation. And now I guess they'll open it up for questions. I'll turn the floor back over to Candace.
Thank you so much. I'm gonna go ahead and turn it over to our district director, Kathy Register, who will be fielding through the questions.
All right, thank you both, Mr. Sperling and Mr. Bryant, for this great information today. We really don't have a lot of questions, but I did take some notes as you all were speaking. There are a lot of folks, Candace, who are asking where the information from today's presentations will be located, and if the slide presentations from both Mr. Sperling and Mr. Bryant will be available as well for individuals to go back and review, or for individuals who missed the presentations today.
Sure. So the presentations will be available, including the educational material, on our website. Hopefully it'll be up sometime next week.
Okay, this is for Mr. Sperling. Is the National Institute of Health ERA Commons applicable for non-healthcare businesses?
That answer would be yes. It doesn't necessarily have to be about healthcare. If you're a nonprofit with a 501c3, you will certainly be required to submit your applications using ERA Commons Assist, and that's one of the platforms inside their portal. So yes, just if you log into grants.gov, it'll lead you to ERA Commons, and my response is you don't have to be specifically healthcare in order to utilize that platform.
All right. Can for-profit businesses apply for federal grants? Is there a preference for nonprofit businesses? That's for you, also for you, Mr. Sperling.
Yes, the answer is yes. And any NOFA, any notice of funding opportunity, it's a section in there that says eligibility. And in that eligibility section, it will let you know straight away whether or not this grant announcement is for nonprofits, nonprofits with higher education, meaning academic institutions. And then there are nonprofits that are not academic institutions. And there are for-profit institutions. So any and all of the acceptable folks who are targeted to respond to this are listed under the section called eligibility. So yes, nonprofit, you don't have to be a nonprofit depending upon what that grant or what that NOFA is talking about. You got to read carefully.
Okay. What's the typical time frame of submitting applications and receiving the notice of award? Also, is there typically a liaison assigned to your agency to ensure that you are properly following guidelines for the grant? That's for you also, Mr. Sperling. So in the notice of award, the NOFA, especially around SAMHSA, I can talk really specifically about SAMHSA. SAMHSA will say in the NOFA exactly when the project will have to start. They are accepting grants, the date that the grant is announced and when it's cut off. And in that NOFA, it says it'll start, that particular work will start on a certain date and time. So you can extrapolate, or you can consider between the time that your cutoff time typically is around 3 months, but don't quote me on that, because the time that the grant says you have to have your proposal submitted by, and the start date of the proposal, the start date of the work is embedded in that NOFA, that notice of funding opportunity. So typically it's taken me about 3 months to hear back from folks, and that's the long end. Sometimes it's been shorter periods than that. Okay, Mr. Bryant, where can I find someone to help me with the 501c3 application?
A 501c3 is something that you get initiated outside of course, grants. And so That's I think it's form number 1023. It's an IRS form that the Internal Revenue Service has. You can Google up how to get one of those forms, and it's anyone can fill them out, but it usually goes faster if you have the support of a lawyer or someone in the legal field. The IRS takes your once you're registered within your state as an entity, as a nonprofit entity, you can also get your 501c3. Like I said, it helps if you have a lawyer, because they IRS reviews those faster. It seems like they put them to the top of the stack rather than those that are just submitted by organizations independently. But that's the first step. You fill out a request for a 501c3 designation, and it talks about what's the name, the legal name of your entity, your organization, and what kind of charitable services that you provide. On another note, to that previous question that was asked about for-profit businesses, yes, in some cases you can apply, but I encourage people who have a for-profit business to also have a nonprofit arm. And it's sort of selfish, but I have many friends from college who hit me up every year, different times of the year, for, oh, my son's in a traveling baseball team, and I want you to buy a ticket to our banquet so we can buy uniforms, or we can rent charter vans to go to these away games and things like that. And I said, just start a nonprofit. There are people that own the sandwich shop that can also be passionate about youth programs, and then say, okay, well, I want to support that through a nonprofit. The value of that is that you can have through a nonprofit, you can get equipment, you can get resources to support things that you're truly passionate about. And also it can, in many ways, support your for-profit business. If you get, say, a computer equipment and a copy machine for your nonprofit to print out marketing materials for your youth programs, you can still use that copier and laptop for your for-profit business. That's perfectly legal. And a lot of people miss that connection. So you should think about exploring having a nonprofit arm to your for-profit business as a separate entity.
Okay, Mr. Bryant, could you put that QR code back up? Someone is asking for that. They missed it.
Oh, okay. Let me see if I can do that real quick.
Okay.
All right, it's the previous slide. Let me see if I could get to that slide.
And Mr. Sperling, they're also asking for you to put your contact information back up as well. So after, we'll leave the QR code up for maybe a minute or so. And then if you both, well, Mr. Sperling first, put his contact information up, and then after we leave his up for about 30 seconds, then we'll put Mr. Bryant's information back up as well.
Okay. Let me know when you want me to take this down.
Okay. Okay. While we're doing that, Mr. Bryant, do you provide grant writing services?
I do. As I said, I'm a certified grant writing instructor, and I go through a long process to educate people on how to break down writing a proposal. One of the biggest challenges I see in working with communities all throughout the Southeast is that nomenclature is the biggest issue. Once people are comfortable with the language of grants, then it's not as intimidating. When they see things like, I need a background statement, a project narrative, and all this, that can be confusing to people who've never written a proposal before. And so I emphasize understanding what the words mean, and then show you how to break that down and then piece together your proposal.
Okay. If you are a startup business and you do not have performance history, Are there resources that discuss guidelines for grants? I think the reference made today was process evaluations.
So I'll respond to that in this way. There are many fledgling organizations that are startups that have come to me over the years who are beginning to emerge as leaders in this behavioral health service industry. So I allowed them to partner with me in some of our grant. In other words, I wrote them in as a service provider that builds their resume. So if I were to make any recommendation to a new agency, and that would be to partner with an agency who's got the experience, who's got the history, and they in turn can allow you to partner with them, maybe not for money, but certainly to build your resume of experiences, and maybe sometimes even depend upon what you are providing, maybe even a part of that award. So that's my response to that. We got started. We were partnering with other organizations that already existed, and obviously it's a couple of decades ago, but that thought process still works today. And Kathy, can I take this down now?
Yes, please. Mr. Bryant, did you put yours up?
I will.
Okay. The next question is, if it is, I guess, a reimbursement grant, is there a company that will fund your awarded grant until the payment comes in? I'm not sure.
Well, I'll respond to that and just talking about my experience. So what I've done is gone to the bank years ago and opened up a line of credit. I use that line of credit in many different ways. And in terms of cost reimbursement grants, that's one of the things that it'll support my payroll in some instances until that reimbursement grant comes through. Cost reimbursement grants are really tricky. You have to think that through carefully, because you have to, as it relates to the question, you have to be able to support that cost until you get that money back in the door. And typically I've used my line of credit in order to do that.
Okay. Is there a standard amount of time that accountability reports are required or expected?
In my experience, it's in the grant, it's in the NOFA, it's in the notice of funding opportunity. They'll spell it out for you. We want these and in some instances, I'll use SAMHSA again as an example. In some instances, they have portals for data entry on a regular basis. In other words, if you're collecting data from wherever you collected it from, depending upon the funder, there are portals where that for that data that you've collected to be uploaded on a regular basis every month. At the end of every month, you're uploading data. Every quarter, you're uploading data. So it depends upon who's providing that grant and what their requirements are. So again, different requirements for different funders.
Okay, Mr. Bryant, you can remove your information. Can we partner with the EPA on new small startups for inventions, ideas on new clean water solutions? And there was one about, I think, cybersecurity. I have one, but can never find any available for this.
Well, there's a couple of approaches. I'd say yes and no first, but there's no direct grant for these niche kind of technologies. What EPA does, they fund from headquarters for a lot of initiatives that are then targeted towards our academic institutions. We have programs throughout the federal family and in many different agencies that deal with technology, and we have them going through our schools, our Research One institutions and our land grant institutions. They have programs known as SBIR, which is the Small Business Innovation Research Grants. We also have the Sustainable Technology Transfer Grants. Those are the two kinds of mechanisms for a state-of-the-art technology for people who have an interest in, say, piloting new technologies to see if that's something that can get some seed funding for. I know the Department of Energy, U.S. Department of Agriculture. You just have to think broadly of where your technology fits. And if it's something that's currently not used by a specific agency, you can make a pitch to them. But they have, you can Google up Sustainable Technology Transfer Grants and Small Business Innovation Research Grants. Many of them are funded through the National Science Foundation, as well as through some of our other technical agencies, but not EPA just specifically.
That's great. Okay, can you own more than one nonprofit? Is there an agency for nonprofit churches?
You can have more than one nonprofit, definitely.
Yeah, you can. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, sir. Yeah.
So yeah, faith-based has its own within the SAMHSA. In the SAMHSA world, faith-based has its own platforms from which they provide funding for. So faith institutions are mentioned on the SAMHSA website. So I would encourage people to just take a look at that. And in the search bar at the top, put in faith-based, or put in faith institutions, and what they are funding and what they're capable or interested in will pop up for you.
And if I may add, in my trainings with faith-based institutions, I would encourage faith-based organizations that have a nonprofit arm, like a community development corporation, to create a nonprofit entity that has a secular name. And I don't want to ruffle anybody's feathers by saying that, but the results have shown that if there is a secular name to an organization, you have an 80% better chance of getting funded than if it just had a completely religious sounding name to it. Like if your organization, if you were Second Baptist Church of Fort Valley, Georgia, and you had a nonprofit entity that was, the Second Baptist Community Development Corporation, you probably would not get funded as quickly as you would if you were called a Helping Hand Incorporated. Do you understand the difference in the name? So it's a game, but you have to understand how the game is played in order to improve your chances of being funded.
What is a fair price for grant writing?
Depends on the value of the grant. I mean, if I'm going to write $1 million proposal, I'm going to ask for more than if I was writing a $10,000 proposal. You know, it's the level of effort. And so typically what I've seen is people offering, or people who are seasoned professionals, asking for anywhere from 10 to 20% of the grant total as an administrative fee.
Okay, I noticed many grants coming out allow for only 30 to 45 days. What do you recommend for startup nonprofits to prepare in a timely manner, such as have your partners ready, etc.? What other ways could we prepare in advance for these opportunities?
Each federal agency has a strategic plan, and those strategic plans lay out the grants that they propose to be offering for that fiscal year. The fiscal year starts October 1 each year. And so if you have a program that, say, is interested in working with youth, look at the grants that you could look through the whole federal family for grants that target your particular demographic. And at the beginning of the year, look at their strategic plan to say, oh, they're funding in this time, or this is the buzzword that this agency is using to address something that I'm interested in working in. And you have to sort of ride the wave. Many community groups, say, who were not environmental justice organizations initially, they were like wanting to work with at-risk communities, at-risk youth, what have you. They've modified their proposals to meet the language of, say, environmental justice grants, because that's where all the money was going. So you just have to understand how to ride the wave and modify your proposal to meet your needs, but using tweaked language in order to get the resources that you need and also provide those services that that funding agency wants.
And I'm sorry, go ahead, Mrs.
No, I
Sperling.
would just a quick caveat about Stan and how we've approached this thing. We stay in our lane and we don't chase money. You know, we let our purpose drive us. So what are we doing? What's our purpose? What's our mission? And then we look for grants, foundation support, private donor dollars to support their vision and that mission. And some we've gotten, some we haven't. We've written grants and didn't get funded. As Kyle mentioned earlier, man, some of them you get and some of them you don't. So we continue to write, but what we haven't done is chase money. In other words, I wouldn't go after a grant that's homelessness. That's not what we do. It might be 100, 150, 100 and whatever many thousands of dollars, but I'm not going to chase that because that's not what I do. So that I just want to put that caveat up there.
Okay, and this is the last question. Is it advisable to hire a federal grant writer? Both of you or either of you?
Well, I mean, if you got the resources to find somebody with experience. So the first question I've asked any grant writer, what have you gotten funded? That's the first question. I'm a grant writer. Okay, what have you gotten funded? So then I can see whether or not you actually are a grant writer. People will say that never got funded in their life. They've written 100 grants and 0 got funded. That's not what you want. So I would just leave it there. So to hire one, if you got the money to do it, fine. But the idea of vetting that person is going to be critical. And that's one of the questions I would always ask.
And all I'll add to that is that, you know, I believe in that parable about give a man a fish he eats for the day, teach him to fish he eats for a lifetime. When you ask someone, when you hire someone to be a grant writer for you, understand that whatever they write is what you have to do if that grant gets funded. So I think it's more advantageous to teach you how to write a fundable proposal, do the hand holding with you, walk you through that iterative process so that you understand. And so you could feed yourself going forward. You don't have to pay a grant writer, but you're paying for a consultant to educate you on what to look for, what to overlook, what landmines to avoid.
Well, I want to thank you both, and there are any number of comments on here thanking you for this wonderful information. The individuals who are participating today, I think we had over 250 indicated that the information has just been so helpful. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to, I'll turn it over to our Chief of Staff, Marcus Garza, for closing comments. And thank you both again.
Thanks, Kathy. Hello, everyone. For those joining us for the first time today, my name is Marcus Garza. I'm the Congressman's Chief of Staff here in our Washington, D.C. office. For our returning guests, it's good to see you all again. We appreciate everyone taking time out of their busy schedules to join us today. For day 2 of Congressman Johnson's annual Week of Hope, we continue to build on our efforts to be of service to those who are doing great work on the ground across Georgia's 4th District. We hope you found today's presentation, tips for submitting a successful application, to be helpful. A special thank you to our presenters for sharing their years of experience and useful insights in grant writing with us today. I know we shared a lot of information with you today, so I want to reiterate what my colleague Kathy mentioned earlier. Every presentation during our 4-day workshop series will be recorded, and all the material shared with us will be made available on Congressman Johnson's website sometime next week. You can find that information at the Serving You tab at the top of our homepage at hankjohnson.house.gov. Finally, we invite you all to join us again tomorrow at 1 p.m. sharp for day 3, part 3 of our grants workshop, which will focus on potential grant opportunities. Our guest presenters joining us include Jason Becker with the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development's Office of Community Planning and Development, Linda Fan from the U.S. Department of Justice's Office of Violence Against Women, Vince Davenport from the U.S. Department of Justice's Office of Justice Programs, Cheryl Thomas with the U.S. Department of Justice's Community-Oriented Policing Services Program, and we'll be joined once again by Mr. Kyle Bryant with the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. With that, this concludes today's presentation. Thank you again for joining us. Have a great rest of your day.